Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We appreciate, like I said, everyone being here. And Mr. Secretary, if you'd please call roll.
Senator Berg, Senator Boswell, Senator Deneen, Senator Harper Angel, Senator Higdon, Senator Meredith, Senator Smith, Senator Westerfield, Senator Williams, Senator Wilson, Representative Blanton, Representative Bojanowski, Representative Bratcher, Representative Dietz,
Here.
Representative Dossett, Representative Freeland,
Present.
Representative Fugit,
Here.
Representative Gooch, Representative Hart,
Here.
Representative Johnson,
Here.
Representative Cook, Representative Lewis, Representative Maddox, Representative Massaroni,
Here.
Representative Proctor,
Present.
Representative Raymer, Representative Sharp, Representative Stalker,
Present.
Representative Stevenson,
Present.
Representative Tackett Lafferty, Representative Wesley, Senator Girdler, Chair Thomas.
Present. And okay, we have a quorum. All right. At this time, I'm going to ask our distinguished guest to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then please remain standing as Representative Massaroni is going to lead us in a prayer.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We bow our heads for prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, as we gather today, we seek your guidance and strength. We're grateful for our brave men and women who are and have deployed to the border and around the nation. Protect them, grant courage, and offer your peace. Watch over them with your care, shield them from harm, and provide wisdom and strength. Comfort their families who wait in hope and with concern. We also pray for our nation's unity and peace. Bless those facing struggles, and may your grace guide us all. May our troops return home safely, and may our nation find strength and healing in you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Members, if you would look, the meetings of September's meeting are in there. Yep. If I don't hear any no votes, I'm just going to accept them under acclamation. Is that okay? All righty. Make note, Representative Dawson came in. All righty. At this time, Representative Hart has a distinguished vet that we like to always do. Remember, members, if there's anybody in your communities, or even if they're not in your communities, that have had a distinguished career or a moment or something like that, just please let us know, and we'll try to get them on the agenda. We will be doing this all during regular session, too. So, Representative Hart, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a distinct honor today to bring forward in front of you guys Sergeant Major Kenneth Winninger, and I've had the privilege of not only serving with him in the Army National Guard, I also went to college with him. So we've known each other for quite some time. He in February 14th, 1990, he joined A Battery, 2nd 138th of the Field Artillery, the Kentucky Army National Guard. He served 33 years, 6 months, and 26 days. He's married to Patty Winninger for the last 28 years of wedded bliss. He has 4 children, 11 grandchildren. He's a graduate from Grant County High School, and he's also a graduate from Northern Kentucky University with a BS in Construction Technology, and has worked the last 22 years as a land surveyor. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Sergeant Major Kenneth Winninger.
Thank you, Mark. Members of the Veterans Committee, it's such an honor to be here with you today. Thank you for this opportunity to celebrate service to our country and our great Commonwealth. I joined the Kentucky National Guard when I was 19. Although there were rough, challenging times, even bad days, I never regretted my decision. The experience gave me the confidence to overcome whatever hurdle presented itself. It also filled me with pride to serve my country and my state. I've had the privilege to serve with thousands of great soldiers, visit 8 countries, 4 continents, and train and work with soldiers from over a dozen different countries. I've always tried to pass on my passion for the field artillery to them. While deployed to Africa in 2012, I got a chance to go on a 2-week field problem with the French artillery battery. 20 Kentucky Guardsmen, all artillerymen, and 60 French artillerymen, and 1 interpreter. We wondered how that was going to work, but with some broken English and broken French, a lot of hand signals, and some grunts and nods, we found out that the artillery language is universal. I've made some lifelong friends while serving. Some of those friendships are extremely close. People I would have never met if not for my service to our country. Of course, I've known Mark since college. Retired Staff Sergeant Rob Proctor, who I met on my first drill and spent 21 years together in Kentucky National Guard, pretty much as battle buddies and companions. He lives 10 miles away from me, and we talk several times a week. To Bilad Muhammad, who was my interpreter in Afghanistan, who's still in Kabul and trying to get out, and me and him speak every week. I got to do some great training, best the Army had. I went to airborne school, air assault school, paladin commander's course, weapons craft instructor's course, which is Kentucky's version of close quarters combat. Qualified with my individual weapons as an expert most of the time. I was a top section chief in the battery several times. I was wounded in an IED blast on June 14th, 2007 in Afghanistan, the Army's birthday. Happy birthday. So I got to experience the amazing medical branch, and I appreciate them so much. They're truly amazing. I successfully navigated 80% of the minefields that I found myself in. My soldiers often ask me what to say when someone thanks them for their service. I tell them I always just reply, "Thank you. I had a blast." All right, I was afraid we wouldn't get it. Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you so much for what you do for veterans. It is truly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sergeant Major. All right, we have a pretty robust agenda today, so we will start right off with the Department of Military Affairs and Kentucky National Guard update. We always enjoy having this, and we want to thank y'all for being here, and I know we have members of the service that are going down to the border and some overseas, so if y'all need to pull up some wing chairs, it looks like we got 5.
Okay.
We're going to have enough. We might need 6 there.
Mr. Chair, I'll take all the support I can get.
While y'all are getting situated, Representative Wesley just has a quick introduction there. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have Lieutenant Jennifer Korth here, and she's working with the Senate, and I'd like to just welcome her today. She is from the 149th Infantry National Guard Unit over in Ravenna, Estill County, so I just want you to make her feel welcome, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Tackett Lafferty, do you have a little guest back there?
I'm sorry that I was running a little behind, but my little guest, that is my youngest son. He's joining us today. His name's Owen Walker Lafferty. He's a first grader at May Valley Elementary School.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you. All righty. General, multiple generals. The floor is yours.
Yes, sir. Chairman Thomas and committee members.
Make sure that light screen.
Need to figure out
There we go.
the equipment first. All right, so we greatly appreciate you all sharing some time with us and enabling us to share some of the considerations, dynamics that are going on in your National Guard at this junction. You know, one of the first things that I wanted to share with you, I know it came up as a presentation to this body. I think it was back in August where the KDVA came in and spoke about suicide and suicide rates and suicidal ideation amongst the veterans community in particular. So I wanted to likewise share our perspective and specifically the National Guard perspective on it as well. That, you know, for the past 2 decades and all of the deployments that the military has had, inclusive of the Kentucky National Guard, that when many of those deployments began and you saw across all the formations of the military that were deploying a increase or a spike in the suicidal rates. And this was a spike above what the norm was for our country or our societies. So, you know, suddenly the concern was the stress that a lot of the deployed members of the military got exposed to as a result of a deployment to Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever they went. That was the direct cause for this increase. But then subsequently, and especially into the National Guard and other reserve components, what we started to observe after just a few years, that there was a significant increase in those attempts amongst folks who had not deployed at all. And so, you know, suddenly that raised an issue. What are the variables that need to be considered, because there are obviously other dynamics that are impacting this case. So for the past 2 decades, the entire military, the Kentucky National Guard has gotten after this to understand it and see what we can do for the men and women, the soldiers and airmen in our formations. And so towards that end, I was going to introduce it in just a moment. I've got sitting to my left Major Tim Olson. Tim is our deputy state surgeon. He's also the director of psychological health for our formations. And Tim, just so you fully understand his credentials as a SME, as a subject matter expert, he's also a ABD guy. He's pursuing his PhD, and he's an all but dissertation at this junction in this arena. So he's the most credible guy in our formation to speak knowledgeably of this subject. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Major Olson.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. As General Lamberton said, this is a really unique challenge in our formation across the National Guard, across the active components, across the veteran community. And so it's been a lot of really healthy discussion about it, but we do have some unique insights we can share from our formation. And as General Lamberton said, this is a personal and professional passion of mine. Depending on if my toddlers sleep over the next year, I will finish that dissertation and be complete. But yeah, this is our focus. The National Guard is an understudied population when it comes to suicide. And so we really want to get and stay on the leading edge in Kentucky on the battle against suicide. And so share just a little bit of data to give context. I didn't want to overload this presentation with data, but over the last decade, somewhere around 2012, 2013, that's when the national attention really started focusing on these suicide rates across the veteran community and across the military community. And so a lot of good discussion came from that, a lot of healthy questions, and some of the early conversations. If you look at the data in 2013 at the bottom of this graph on this slide, you can see the general population suicide rates are in yellow at the bottom there. The green line shows the broader veteran population, those who have already been separated. And then I chose to just use Army data just to keep it simple for today. Unfortunately, the Army of all the branches has historically had a higher suicide rate than the other branches. And so just to show the contrast between the active component in red and then the National Guard component in blue, there were a lot of questions early on. If you look at 2013, does the National Guard have higher suicide rates? Does active component have lower? 2013 at first made it seem that the National Guard had much higher suicide rates than the rest of even the active duty population. And so there were good, healthy conversations about that early on. What we've seen over time, though, if you look at the rest of this data over the last decade, is these numbers have kind of ebbed and flowed. And so some years the National Guard does have a little higher suicide rate than the active component. Sometimes it's a little lower. The only trends that are really holding consistently firm is that the entire veteran and military population does continue to have a significantly higher suicide rate than the general population. And so the conclusion we take from that is none of us are immune. None of us have figured it out. None of us have solved the suicide challenge yet. And so we will not rest. We will continue to improve our programs until we see those numbers dramatically reduce and decrease moving forward. And so on the next slide, I can highlight a few of our unique challenges, even though the active component and the reserve component do share similar suicide rates depending on the year. We do know there are a lot of contrasting challenges and unique opportunities that we have to serve our service members. And so the overarching challenge we all have is still stigma. Stigma has gotten much better over the last 5 or 10 years. However, there's still a significant fear about engaging in mental health services and other types of support when somebody is facing a suicidal crisis. There's fear of how they'll be perceived, if they'll be perceived as weak. There's fear that it will impact their career in a negative way. And so a lot of our messaging internally in the Kentucky Guard is to try to dispel that stigma and that myth that our services, our teams are passionate about protecting careers, helping our service members see that reaching out is a sign of strength and a sign of support, and we are in the business of protecting them from any career implications whenever possible. And so more specifically, we do know a lot about the specific risk factors that do impact our suicide rates and what leads to it. And as, again, General Lamberton alluded to earlier, early on when these suicide rates started spiking and that was publicized, it was kind of assumed. We all jumped to the same conclusion that this has to be combat-related PTSD. It's got to be directly connected to deployments. And what we've seen in the data is that's not really the case. And so I say that very carefully because PTSD certainly can and does lead to suicide for far too many veterans. PTSD treatment, good PTSD treatment is essential, and we continue to support those resources. But when we look at what's leading to suicides across our formation, it's a lot of life stressors in our young service members that are really relatable to a lot of us. Relationship challenges and distress, administrative and legal challenges, work and financial related distress. Those are the things that are often precursors to a suicide death in our formation. We do see a lot of mental health diagnoses. In 2021, it only showed that about a third of those who died by suicide had an active mental health diagnosis at the time. Many argue that this is probably a low number, that it's underreported due to stigma, due to reluctance to engage in care. And that is probably true, but it doesn't negate all those other factors that do lead to suicide. Firearms access and the use of firearms is another very significant risk factor for our service members. We know our service members unfortunately die using a firearm far greater than the general population, that about 50% of suicides in the general population use firearms as the means of death. For our service members, it's much higher. We know our service members are familiar with firearms, they have access to them. And so really talking about weapon safety, lethal means safety is a common phrase we use, not gun control, not taking away guns. Those are subjects that are very different. But just how do we encourage our service members to make sure that they are safe when using firearms, or if they're having a very difficult chapter of life, how do they secure that firearm in a safe way so they're not tempted to use it in a permanent manner? And so we look at some of the unique challenges that we do have in the Guard in contrasting to the active duty. Our access to healthcare is different. When I was a young sergeant on active duty, my life wasn't easy, but when I got hurt, if I broke my leg, it was a pretty simple process. I went to the on-post hospital, it was free, I got healthy, I came back to work. For our Guard service members, there's a lot more variety in their access to healthcare. Some of our service members have TRICARE access, great insurance, some don't. Some meet the VA criteria to access VA healthcare, which is wonderful in Kentucky, but some have maybe never deployed or done enough time on active duty to meet that criteria to qualify for those services. And so if we look at all of the different things that keeps our service members busy, everybody in this room, I'm sure, is well aware of the floods, tornadoes, civil disturbance, overseas deployments, all of the things our service members have been busy with, along with their civilian careers and balancing their family lives. It just doesn't leave a whole lot of bandwidth and sometimes funds for proactively seeking healthcare. And so we find we have to be a little more creative and customize healthcare plans for our service members. There are some policy and funding limitations to some of the support that we offer our service members. Our behavioral health team, our mental health clinicians, we have an excellent team that I'll talk about in just a moment. But there are some federal kind of restrictions on how they're used and what their scope of their duties are. We cannot currently offer full mental health treatment within our force. And so even though we have great clinicians that support our service members, Often, if there's a service member who comes to us with needs that are outside the scope of what we can offer, we do have to refer them to community providers. And so the result of that is sometimes a service member has to tell their story 2, 3, 4 times before they get to the right clinician and the right type of care who's going to help them long term. And so there are some unique challenges, but I do want to highlight a lot of the good things we have going on right now. We do offer a robust team and teams of teams that support our service members. And I could talk about them for hours. I know I want to be mindful of everybody's time of all the depth of what they do, but just a sampling of the portfolio that's available to our service members. Our behavioral health team, we do have 6 full-time clinicians, 5 part-time clinicians that stay very busy. Even with those policy limitations I mentioned, they're engaged with at least 250 service members at any given time. They're very proactively working on suicide risk factors with many of our service members. Our integrated primary prevention, or IPP team, this is a newer team to the Guard. This is a newer team across the DoD. It came from a congressional mandate to really look more closely across the DoD at what works in the prevention realm, what is evidence-based prevention, and how do we focus our efforts on those things that really do move the needle. And so this is a new team in Kentucky, but we're very optimistic about the impact they're going to have on our formation. Our military and family services team, again, multiple teams there that focused on health education, suicide prevention, fitness, nutrition, a whole lot of different things that they offer our service members, along with what we call our SURFers, our soldier and family readiness specialists. This is a team scattered across the state into 10 different regions. They help service members with finding financial resources if they're in financial hardship, getting budget counseling, education for families, so many different things that they offer outside of the mental health realm, outside of the overt suicide prevention realm, but they meet a lot of our service members where they are with those other needs. We have a large team of chaplains who offer spiritual support, a lot of focus on relationship skills training, which is essential for suicide prevention. As I mentioned, those relationship stressors are one of our biggest predictors of suicide, so their work is essential. In addition to our ESGR team, which focuses on supporting our service members, advocating for their civilian employment to be maintained if they are deployed or if they are doing active service, helping our service members who might be unemployed or underemployed, a lot of great resources that are available to our service members through these teams. Externally, we know our service members do not live in a bubble. They don't live in military installations, and so we collaborate very closely with a lot of community partners. We're proud to be active participants on the Governor's Challenge team. We work closely with the VA, the Vet Center, KDVA. Operation Immersion is a partnership we have with the Department of Behavioral Health, if you've heard of it. We take a team of civilian clinicians, we put them in our training site in Western Kentucky where they get a little pseudo-basic training experience. We pull in one of our infantry squads to give them a PG version of basic training, what that looks like, yell at them, give them a hard time, make them do push-ups. They get shot at with some paintballs. They have fun, but the intent is that they get an understanding, a bite-sized understanding of military culture and what it means to serve our service members and connect to them. The Guard population as a whole is under-researched a little bit. It's understudied. And so we're very lucky in Kentucky to have some of the most prolific and respected suicide researchers in the country, right down the street. Dr. Julie Searle at the University of Kentucky partnered with us in 2020. We got a large research grant just to study our service members. Did about 2,000 surveys and interviews with our service members to try to understand suicide and our suicide risk factors more specifically. And so we're still analyzing that data. We're still looking at it to see exactly what it means, but it looks like it's going to provide some really valuable insights into how to serve our service members better. And so moving forward, that team does a lot of great work. It's very difficult to measure prevention, right? I wish I could tell you the exact number of suicides we've prevented. That's hard to do. That's hard to measure. So I am confident those teams are saving lives on a regular basis. But again, we're not going to rest there. We're going to continue to improve until we're confident we're seeing change in these statistics. And so moving forward, looking at what makes sense, what national research, what DoD best practices are telling us, even though there is a lot of good things that are happening right now, if you look at this kind of pillars of wellness image on the left there, historically, a lot of these programs, a lot of the ways we conceptualize helping service members is still kind of segmented and siloed in different ways, that we look at emotional health, physical health, spiritual wellness as separate kind of aspects of health. And so it's great that we offer services for those things, but we still see them separately, and we tend to wait until there's a crisis in one of those areas to refer service members to the right folks who can help. So if it's a mental health crisis, we do get them to our mental health team. If it's a spiritual or an existential crisis, we have great chaplains on standby to respond. But moving forward and getting more proactive, we see that real life is not quite that simple. It's not quite that siloed. And so a service member who's struggling in one area of life is probably struggling with a lot of other components of health, and they all kind of overlap. It's extremely difficult to try to understand and verify and predict exactly which stressor is going to cause a crisis and when. And so if we really want to get proactive, we want to ensure that all of our programs are comprehensive, they're integrated, that we're engaging our service members early and often in all of these different aspects of health long before a crisis hits. And so that's our focus right now, and that's our focus of where we think we can move the needle on suicide prevention. And we'll continue to track that data closely to see what's working, what's not, and hopefully look forward to being able to brief you in the future on how we are moving the needle and what's productive. So thank you for your time, and pending any questions, I again appreciate your attention to this subject.
Thank you, Major Olson. We do have a couple questions from the members, so we'll pause just for a sec. And I know we got a long agenda, but Representative Massaroni?
Hi. I worked in Air Force active duty recruiting for about 10 years. And I know once we start going into a recruiting crisis, we start lowering standards. And that would be with the ASVAB, that would be with the psychological test you have to have before that. Is that a concern with your side as a National Guard?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it does come up a lot. Our recruiters will be quick to tell you that in the world of electronic health records as well, that's a unique challenge that they face, that we do live in a culture that, on one end, it's really good that young individuals in the community, teenagers, are engaging in mental health care. They're sometimes being prescribed psychotropic medication. And so on one hand, that's great that they're engaging in care. But yeah, it sometimes does make it difficult for them to come into the military. So it is a unique challenge on the recruiting side. As of right now, we don't see the standards being lowered. We do screen service members as they come in. The military entrance processing sites and stations do screen them. And so they have a pretty robust system of making sure overtly high-risk conditions are not brought into the military. My personal philosophy and perspective, and a lot of the behavioral health community, is looking at this as our service members they're people, they're humans. They have lives, they have childhoods, they have previous experiences. And so I don't know that we'll ever have a system that completely screens for someone who has no challenges in life. But what we want to be very intentional about doing is, as the minute they come in the military, we want them to engage in our resources so we can channel those challenges into strengths and growth and into resilience by engaging with these programs.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your service. As a healthcare provider myself that worked with comprehensive rehabilitation for our active duty military people, this is very near and dear to my heart on the suicide prevention. So when I'm hearing you, I heard that there's limitations or perhaps barriers to getting our service members adequate mental health services. Can you speak a little bit more to that, what the limitations or barriers are?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. So again, because there's such a mix of access to healthcare in our service members, many do have TRICARE insurance, many do have VA care, but not all do. And so we do have a mental health team, like I said, 6 full-time clinicians that offer support. But as of right now, the scope of those regulations that cover our job descriptions, it's brief intervention, crisis intervention, short-term therapy, and we kind of toe that line of what short-term is, but if someone does have a longer term or a complex need, that's not something we can offer internally. And so we have to create customized plans to find what resources are available to our service members based on their insurance, based on where they live and who takes their insurance if they have it, to find them long-term care. And so again, the challenge with that is sometimes it's a time delay, sometimes it takes several steps to get our service members the right type of care. And so yeah, a lot of our current advocacy efforts are looking at how do we shift that, whether it's federal policy change or finding other resources within the state to really make that a more efficient process to get our soldiers care.
Moving right down the row, Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your service. I almost miss wearing the uniform, looking at how sharp you guys look. But I have a question. The families are under as much stress as the military members. When I was serving, we had to tend to the families because oftentimes the military member was not there. Yeah. And my question is, are you, or anybody tracking the suicide rates of family members?
Yes, ma'am. That's a great question. That is a very recent initiative at the DoD level, is to start tracking family suicide rates and what that looks like. And so that data is very preliminary. It's early. It's really too early to talk about trends, but it is something at the DoD level that is starting to be looked at. And yes, ma'am, you're absolutely right. The service impacts the whole family member, and vice versa. The family health impacts our service members. And so looking at ways that we can offer support to the families as well is another limitation we sometimes have, that we don't offer clinical services to family members as of today. And it's something we want to stay proactive on, looking for those resources.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, this is the last question. We'll move on in just a sec. We got Senator Deneen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a two-part question, I guess you can say. The first, would you not agree that sometimes the red tape that our service members are having to deal with can and does attribute and contribute to our suicide rates?
Sir, that sounds like a trick question. That sounds like a complex
Well, it's a lead question. It's leading to my next question.
Yeah,
So-
there certainly are. I think it's a broad subject to define red tape, but yeah, we are a service with a lot of regulations, and we're looking for ways to reduce barriers to care all the time. Absolutely.
And thank you. And that leads me to my second question. So I appreciate you identifying that as a lead question. I look up here at your challenges, and one of the items towards the bottom where it says not all Guard members meet veteran criteria for certain VA resources. That has been on my radar and other members of this committee's radar the entire interim session. Can you expand on those veterans from the National Guard and Reserve?
Yes, sir.
As far as their qualifications to enter into our VA centers in the Commonwealth?
Yes, sir. And I will not pretend to be an expert on all of the VA entrance criteria. I did work for several years in the Lexington VA in their outpatient PTSD clinic. It was a wonderful experience. They have so many great resources. But if you're familiar with the Veterans Healthcare Administration, they do have kind of a tiered criteria of who qualifies for what level of care. And so there's a number of tiers. I do not pretend to have them memorized. But many of them are dependent on if a service member has deployed, if they've deployed overseas to a combat zone, if they've served a certain amount of time in an active duty status, what we call a Title 10 status, if they have a service-connected injury that is verified to have been caused from their service. And so those are all different pathways and entrances to qualify for VA care.
In other words, are they required to have combat experience to enter into our VA?
It's not the only way, Senator, but that is a way to get VA care. Yes, sir.
They got to have Title 10.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm sorry, if I can add to it, they've got to have Title 10 service a number of days. Basic training, AIT, any event other than a training event where they're on active duty orders counts toward that. But as far as training, for training purposes, those days do not count.
Okay. I just want to make sure that our National Guard and our reserve members have access to our VA centers, regardless of their combat experience, because they serve at the behest of our governor and our General Assembly. They are called in to deal with national disasters. Our tornadoes, our flooding, they see things and deal with things similar to a combat zone in bodies and in injuries and recovery. And I believe that those folks deserve a more robust access to our VA centers as we go forward. And I will be requesting that of our federal delegation, that they look into amending those policies to ensure that our reservists and our National Guard members have full access to our VA centers here.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes, sir. I really appreciate those insights. And it's a unique challenge, especially for our younger service members who are newer to the organization. And so we know that they're actually our highest risk population for suicide right now with these risk factors. And many of them may have only been in a year or 2 or 3 years wearing this uniform. And that means their military resume may not be quite as long to hit some of that criteria. And so I will briefly sing the praises of the Vet Center. If you're familiar with the Vet Center, that's a part of the Veterans Health Administration, but it's kind of a separate standalone mental health clinic setup. And so they have some very recent changes in their policies that they will see any National Guard member, regardless of combat history, regardless of combat deployments, they will offer care. It still has to be some sort of stressor connected to their military service, but they will offer a whole new level of care to our service members and their families as well, which has been a huge help just recently as that policy has been developed.
Thank you. I think as we shore up those resources, I think that also will help us in the recruiting efforts in the short.
Senator
Thank you very
Dedeen,
much.
just a real quick comment as we wrap up this phase of it, and I appreciate you're bringing that up. And a couple of the other comments by other representatives kind of paralleled to the subject, but into the National Guard world, I can easily name about 8, 9 different duty statuses that our folks are in, and contingent upon those duty statuses, not only comes different benefits, but sometimes even different pay. And with full respect to my brothers and sisters who were active duty in any service in the Title 10, the USC Code Title 10 world, at least all I knew at the time was that I was regular Army. I didn't even know it was Title 10. But those nuanced differences are only applicable to the National Guard, not other reserve components. And just like you brought up, it not only impacts the benefits, the medical, psychological benefits our folks can receive contingent upon their duty status, but it also impacts on our decision making for who we can deploy to a particular incident or response of a particular incident. And those variables don't, again, with all due respect, cross consideration into the Title 10 world.
Yes, sir. And I just want to make sure that promises made are promises kept. So thank you, sir.
All right, as you can see, this is a topic that we care dearly for and with our vets. So if you let us know how we can help, and we love that open dialogue. So General Lamberton, I'm going to turn it back over to you to next on the agenda or whatever.
Yes, sir. Chairman Thomas, so I greatly appreciate that. And a couple of the questions that we've already fielded had to do with recruiting into the Guard. So I wanted to speak of that, and not just of the Guard in particular. And most, if not everybody here, is probably already aware of, but across the entire military, all branches, all services, all components of all branches and all services. In the past 2 recruiting years, only 2 components actually met their recruiting mission, and that was the Space Force and the Guardians of the Space Force. And so I'd offer, unique to them, bear in mind the Space Force, its force structure these days is just a little over 8,000 folks. So it by far is the smallest force to strive to fill their ranks. So their hill is not quite so steep or tall as to climb as the other services. The other branch to do so was the Marine Corps. And I know we've got at least one Marine in here. I'm not going to call him out, although I'm looking at him. But I would also offer, relative to the Marines that are out there and the Corps, that they started the recruiting year with a significant pool of would-be Marines, of applicants that saw them through the challenges of the past couple of years. And so there are 2 dynamics, and this is from my perspective, Hal Lamberton, for what's really impacted that across all of the services. Number one, and I may have shared this with a number of you all in the past on individual conversations, in our country today, across all the services, all the components, the number of folks who are wearing a uniform today, it's less than 1% of our country's population. And I see some nodding heads, so a number of you are already aware of this. So consider that the population for our country is about 340 million people these days. So the corollary there is that you would have to cross paths with 340 folks before you would cross somebody who's currently serving in some capacity. So in other words, the majority of our country have no direct exposure to the military, let alone indirect exposure to the military. And, this sounds kind of trite in a way, but For the majority of our fellow citizens, all they know of the military is what they see in a movie or on TV or war stories that indirectly get passed down to them, so they simply don't know us. And I say that for anybody who served in any branch, in any service, the men and women of all of the components. So that's one dynamic. The other dynamic, which we're all very much aware of, for not so much now, it's tapered off significantly, but we were subject to a pandemic for about 2.5 years. And I'm not going to go into the politics of that, but not only in our Commonwealth, but across really the entire country. So many of our schools were shut down that military recruiters, where that's the primary center of their recruiting activity, didn't have access to the kids that they would normally pursue. So that relationship, that communication just completely broke off. And so now that we're beyond the pandemic, at this junction, a lot of the recruiters, not just ours in the Guard, but all the services, all the components, again, they're reestablishing those communication networks, not just with the kids, but the administrators in the schools, the counselors in the schools, the teachers, and even the parents of the kids in the schools. But, it takes a little bit of time to reestablish the communication network that's been broken. So I believe that we'll get beyond that, but it ain't going to happen quickly. My impression, it's still going to be another 1.5 years or so before all military recruiters are once again deeply a part of that school system. But just to share some numbers with each of you, so here in the Commonwealth, our population is roughly about 4.8 million. The kids that military recruiters primarily pursue are those into the group of 17 to 21-year-olds, and that's roughly about 20% of our population. So for just here in the Commonwealth, we've got roughly about 960,000 kids who are in that age group. But apply a couple of other filters to that. When you look at the kids who do not have a high school diploma, the kids who mentally, physically, height, weight don't meet to the standards to come into the military, the kids who have ethical issues, and what I primarily mean by that, they already have a criminal record. And a lot of these have a felonious criminal record. And so you couple each one of those filters to the people who are part of that potential pool to come into the military, it gets whittled down by another 23%. And so that brings it down to about 220,000, the pool of potential applicants for the military. So there's another aspect that we've got to apply even further. Of that 23%, and really of the 20% as a whole, only about 9% have any sort of inclination to join the military. They've got exposure through family members, or they've seen a recruiting commercial, or whatever may have inspired them to become a soldier, sailor, Space Force Guardian, or Marine, that it's only 9%. And so here in Kentucky, that brings that pool of potential applicants down to 86,000. And this is Hal Lamberton's math. If you will, spread that out across 120 counties. That means in every county, building on the assumption of equal population, there are only about 700 folks who are eligible and aspire to join the military. That is not a terrifically large number. And so we in the military, the Guard, the other branches, services, all components, likewise, we don't have the recruiting strength to reach out across all 120 counties. So what I'm leading to in your Kentucky National Guard's toolbox, what we came up with, and we initiated this program this past February, what we call it a KEEP program, but Kentucky Enlistment Enhancement Program. What it is basically an incentivized referral program So for the men and the women who are currently into the Kentucky National Guard, that they have a friend or a relative or a neighbor or whoever that they believe is a good potential service members. And that person not only expresses an interest, but eventually raises their hand to join the Guard, will cut a check for $500 for the person who referred them. And we started this program in February. That during the first 5-6 months or so of doing so, it actually was almost immediately successful in that we were gaining a new recruit every week. And this is both the Army National Guard and the Air National Guard here in the state. And so at this junction, about 8 months into the program, we're receiving about just shy of 2 new recruits a week. And for those of you who may have been active duty recruiters, I say this respectfully, there is no appetite in the active duty recruiting world to have any sort of a financial incentive like that they may offer ribbons, they may offer promotions to the junior enlisted members, but there is nothing similar to this that quite simply offer. It's unique to the Guard. At this junction, when we started the program, there were only 3 or 4 other states doing anything similar. Today, there are now 17 states that are doing something very similar, and I'd offer quite simply that it works. And no disrespect to anybody here in the room, but it is not our peer group that's looking to join the military today. We all either have too much white hair or no hair at this junction, but it's the junior airmen and women and soldiers who have their peer group by age and physical qualifications and mental qualifications and educational qualifications. Those are the group that are joined the military today. So it's their referrals that really weigh in and make the difference for the recruiting efforts. But here in Kentucky, between our Army Guard recruiters and our Air Guard recruiters, we've got a total of 88 folks. That sure as heck is not sufficient enough to reach out across 120 counties. So what we've effectively done is mobilize, if you will, our entire force structure across the entire state. And we pretty much have representation from the Kentucky National Guard in all 120 counties. So by virtue of that, we're able to reach out to many more folks than we did previously. It's yielded a instant impact for the recruiting numbers we're receiving. And quite simply, my challenge is sort of twofold. It's to keep the enthusiasm of the program going, that all of our soldiers and airmen in the Kentucky National Guard get engaged with it. And I trust that it'll become such an issue that maybe in the next state fiscal year, I'm coming back to you all saying I need more money to continue to run this program. As it is right now, we're able to absorb those monetized referral inducements by virtue of the budget that we have in DMA, or Department of Military Affairs. But again, I can see where this would grow significantly and have such a positive impact for the Kentucky National Guard, for our force structure, that we would need further state assistance in moving forward. But again, the recruiting dynamic, it's still challenging going into the fiscal year 24 that we're already in at this junction. I would offer again across all of the active duty forces that they're still confronted with that, but this is a unique program to the Guard, something that once again our brothers and sisters in the active duty recruiting world will not pursue, do not have an appetite to pursue, and quite simply I don't know that they have the budget to pursue it either. But that's recruiting in your National Guard these days. So subject to any questions on that, a couple of other subjects I wanted to share with you as well, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Please. We don't have any questions, so we'll just keep moving on.
Okay, another aspect, and I know a few of you are already tracking this, but into the Guard and unique to the Guard, we have what we refer to as an SPP program, or a state partnership program. So think of this worldwide. Roughly, there are about 195 countries in the world today. The National Guard across all states and territories, we have a military-to-military partnership with 100 of those countries today. You know, for example, and some of you all might already be aware of this, but so I'm going to revert back to sharing a story if you hadn't previously. But when the fighting began between Ukraine and Russia, and it's hit the national media, so it's a true, credible story. There was a Ukrainian soldier who was striving, and this is early on in the fighting, so I think it was February of that year still. A Ukrainian soldier was striving to engage a Russian tank with a anti-tank Javelin missile, and he had a misfire with the missile. So he pulled out his iPhone, and just a number of weeks prior to that particular incident, he had been trained on the Javelin with a guardsman from the state of Washington National Guard. You know, hey, I had a misfire. I've got a Russian tank right in front of me. What do I do? And so he contacted with the Washington State Guardsman. The guardsman looked up the misfire procedures, texted that back to the Ukrainian soldier, and then he didn't hear anything for a while. And time pressed on for a bit. Then subsequently, he had another email, a video clip from this Ukrainian soldier, and it showed the picture of a burning Russian tank. So obviously that worked out well. True, credible story. But I offer that in particular. That was Washington State, but actually it's the California National Guard that has the military-to-military relationship with Ukraine. And they've had it for several decades at this junction, but it was heightened subsequent to 2014. And you probably recall 2014 was when the Russians took over the Crimea as part of Ukraine. So the California National Guard was risen to a higher level of their engagement with the Ukrainians. But what I'm getting to, as I just shared with you, we, the National Guard, for these state partnership programs, this is another dynamic that's unique to the Guard. You know, we have a military presence in numerous countries around the world, but not all of them, and not 100 of them as the National Guard does. You know, I get a kick out of it that a Major General Dave Baldwin, who was the Adjutant General for the California National Guard, he shared with me as the fighting started between Ukraine and Russia, literally General Milley, then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he got on the phone with the Adjutant General because General Milley, and his office didn't have the points of contact in the Ukrainian military. They, at the highest level in our DOD, we didn't have the points of contact with the DOD force structure for Ukraine. So he was going to the National Guard to establish those relationships. So again, that capability is unique to the Guard. We, across the 54 states and territories, are pursuing it even further. And as some of y'all are probably aware, we have two such relationships here in Kentucky. The first one came into being about 26 years ago, and that's with Ecuador down in South America. And then just about 8 years ago, we picked up a second one with Djibouti, which is in the Horn of Africa region along the eastern African coast. You know, Djibouti's a particularly poor nation, but what really makes it a viable interest and a valuable interest, it's the only country along the Gulf of Aden, which is a major waterway for oil assets coming out of the Middle East, and Djibouti has a deep water port. On the flip side, it was the Chinese military who built that deep water port. So that's another issue for another conversation later on. But so two comments relative to that. Here's the little old Kentucky National Guard from my perspective because of our relationship with Djibouti, and we have a physical presence there right now, keeping an eye on the expansionist tendencies of the PRC, or the People's Republic of China, as they're engaging worldwide, globally, to expand their efforts and through sometimes nefarious means get even more engaged with other countries around the world. But I bring the partnership program up in order to share with you all. So at the moment, we're pursuing a third partnership, and this one is with Sweden. And we were approached, the Kentucky National Guard was approached last spring as one of 3 other states to pursue this relationship. So subsequent to that initially being dropped in my lap, and I can't filter my language enough so it comes across clean, but I thought it was a neat idea. In pursuing that relationship, we had the Swedish defense attaché out of their embassy already visit us here in Kentucky. He visited both Army and Air elements of the Kentucky National Guard. We'd been invited to their embassy, and I met with the Swedish ambassador there. This is kind of coupled, and you all might be tracking, Sweden also aspires to become a member of NATO, which there are a couple of impediments to that in the names of 2 other countries at the moment. But pursuit of the state partnership program is something that they also very strongly aspire to, and thinking those 2 dynamics will really kind of complement one another. So at this junction, I subsequently found out, and some of you all may be aware, that we've got a former U.S. ambassador to Sweden who lives in Louisville. And we were able to engage that person with the engagements that we had with the defense attaché and also their ambassador as well. So I think we're well positioned to pursue that. If it does so, well, through Ecuador, that ties us into the military's Southern Command. Through Djibouti, that ties us into the military's African Command, and such a relationship with Sweden would tie us into the European Command. So that's beneficial, I think, for Sweden. I think it's beneficial for us, and just the prospect of moving forward on those relationships, it very much is the proverbial win-win scenario. And then just one other thing I wanted to share with you all before I turn it over to emergency management and our youth challenge programs as well. I wasn't going to say this initially, but during the invocation that we had to start your meeting, Mr. Chair, that a prayer was also sent out to soldiers who are overseas. So some of y'all may already be tracking. I know a couple of y'all attended a farewell ceremony, but our 138th Field Artillery headquarters, they are predominantly stationed out of Lexington, and they deployed just a few weeks ago. Right now, they're in the Middle East. So it's not as a result of what's taking place with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. This was a deployment that was scheduled well before that incident. But we have soldiers who are in the Middle East, and yes, that is a risky environment for them. So I ask you, likewise, keep them in your prayers, because they are in a targeted situation. Nobody has been hurt at this junction, but we do have folks in harm's way. And it's not just the Middle East. We also have soldiers who are currently in Poland. Now the risk to them is significantly less, but by virtue of their deployment, they are indirectly engaged in support of the actions that are taking place between the Ukrainians and Russians right now. So again, this is transparent to the majority of folks, I believe, in our Commonwealth. As I mentioned a little bit ago, just how few people in our society have any direct or indirect awareness of the military. But that also is applicable to the men and the women in the National Guard here in our Commonwealth. But the National Guard these days were about quite a bit more than just filling sandbags in response to a flood. We still do that too, and we deal with tornado responses and cybersecurity issues and incidents of civil disturbance. but your National Guard very much is a significant part of the entire DoD and the entire DoD's world response. So, sir, subject to any questions, that's all I've got, and we'll turn it over to emergency management next.
We had one quick question, and then we will be glad to hear from Mr. Slinker, Director Slinker. Representative Massaroni.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm hearing we have a lot of regardsmen overseas and proxy wars and stuff, but I don't recall Congress declaring a war. Constitutionally, why do we have so many people overseas in all these proxy wars? I'm an advocate for military. My husband and I served our whole lives in the military, but it just don't seem that is the role that our guardsmen, when they enter the military as a guardsman, they don't expect to be in proxy wars all over the place.
Yes,
here
ma'am.
for us.
So I'll share two thoughts, and this is Hal Lamberton. It's not General Lambert, and it's not the Adjutant General for the Guard and the state. But for the men and the women who join our force structure these days, and this very much is a post 911 dynamic. I've been a guardsman now for about 26 years, and I was in initially before 911, and obviously subsequent to that. The men and the women we've got joining the Guard today sincerely have the expectation they're going to deploy somewhere. It may be to the Middle East, it may be to the southwest border, it may be to some other type of ancillary dynamic into the world, but they join with that expectation. That the folks, my experience, that we had in the Guard prior to that, and this is going back to Vietnam era days, they joined the Guard as a means of avoiding those types of dynamics. So it's a different force structure, it's a different mentality, it's a different aspiration. You know, for the aspect of why our country is engaged with that, and as you indicated, we do not call it a war, but two thoughts there as well. You know, I mentioned the NATO partnership a little bit ago, and that partnership is only as credible as the countries who join it will follow through on what they say they're going to do. And quite simply, I'm proud to say that I think we've held every partnered relationship, regardless if it was through the active duty force structure or the Guard force structure or the USAR force structure. So Hal Lamberton's belief is that that's a dynamic we need to maintain. And then my third and final comment there as well, and I'm sure some of you have heard of a dynamic, it's been brought up here in our General Assembly previously, in the General Assemblies of other states, a protected the Guard issue. So first of all, that's a euphemism. It really does not protect the Guard. And the mindset behind that is to not deploy the Guard unless there has been a congressional declaration of war. But in the world, in the DoD world that we exist in right now, my impression is if any state gets behind that, and no state has gotten behind it, in spite of what some folks may claim to be truth with it, no state has gotten behind it, because it's going to, from my perspective, result in less resources, less equipment coming to the Guard. The viability of the Guard for being engaged in any sort of real-world operation is going to be significantly diminished. And what was behind that mindset really was not ever a focus on the Guard, or for that matter, really even a focus on the military, but to what was just brought up. The mindset was that we should never get involved as a country militarily unless there has been a declaration of war. So I'm giving you Hal Lamberton's perspective on it. The SecDef hasn't called me lately to ask what my opinion is with it, and yet I do not foresee that as a viable piece for the Guard and the evolution of the Guard. Our National Guard today is not who or what we were just even 25 years ago. And I sincerely like the folks. I like the folks that I get to serve with these days, and I'd offer all of us have a dynamic. We all know, because as I was telling the chair a little bit ago, I don't refer to he or I as being, just more experienced at this point. But we all know that if we're in a situation and we get to work with other people who want to be there, it's going to be a terrific dynamic. If we're in a situation where other folks do not want to be there, even though it may be perceived as a good organization or a good dynamic to respond to, it's going to end up being miserable. The folks that we've got in the Guard today, my perspective, it makes it a terrific situation to be engaged with. And I believe that that's the mindset of the men and the women we have in our formations because of their engagement with what I'd call a real-world operation. I know that that's a little bit more of a narrative than maybe you're thinking of, but those are my thoughts.
All right, we have picked up a few more questions, and let's stop after these two because we still have a couple more presenters here in a sec. So, Representative Bratcher.
Yes, sir. Thank you, General, for your presentation. Very informative. I had a question, kind of relating to the. We have a presentation after this with the Urban Search and Rescue presentation that is being presented to us about formatting in this state. How does the National Guard and that entity or that created entity work together, or will they be working together, or how will that work? Are you in it? I didn't know if you were aware of it or not.
Oh, I'm very much aware of it. So Representative, to answer your question, and I'll defer to my brother from emergency management to elaborate further. But just the structure of emergency management, and a number of you all are probably very much and perhaps more familiar with this than I. My perspective is that emergency management in the National Guard in our state, it's not this way in every state, but actually only 17 states that are out there are integrated with one another. For all the ESFs, the emergency support functions that come under Director Slinker's world, that a number of them have National Guard representation because we're simply the provider of not just resources but organized manning to a lot of the responses, whether it's transportation, operations, flight operations, even, and I know that we've got some firemen into the room, but that's another aspect where the Guard's a part of it. So in answering your questions, I'll also phrase it this way. If you look at an organizational chart for DMA here in the Commonwealth, emergency management actually on the org chart is subordinate to the Guard. But then, and most of you are probably aware of this anyways, when it comes to response for any sort of an incident, the KYEM folks very much takes the lead, and the rest of the resources available through the uniformed National Guard become resources under his direction. So it's kind of an odd relationship, but if it were the other way around and everything had to filter through me, then I, as the Adjutant General, would only be a bureaucratic impediment to emergency management's ability to respond to any type of an incident they would get involved with. So to answer your original question, are we involved with the USAR aspect, and do we have forces that can contribute to it? Very much so, but it's under Director Slinker's lead.
Thank you, General.
All right, Representative Maddox, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question pertains to the partnerships. Specifically, I would assume naturally that those decisions are made at the federal level in terms of whom it's appropriate to partner with, and I understand the relationship in terms of NATO nations, but You spoke of Sweden and understanding, that they're currently an invitee. That's their status, and they're not fully admitted into NATO. When those decisions are being made as far as which partnerships that it's appropriate to seek out or to entertain, could you characterize what that looks like for us to the extent of your knowledge, understanding that it's at the federal level? Because when we're talking about partnering with nations that may have a combatant status that are currently engaged overseas, I could see that there could be pretty broad-reaching implications for that if states are maintaining those partnerships or providing assistance or aid on any level. So I'm very curious about that.
No, ma'am, that's a terrific question. It's something that as offered with the example of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict right now, that the California National Guard has been engaged in the prelude to that from a training perspective, but they, by the authorities under DOD, are not allowed to engage in country fighting right along with the same soldiers that they trained in the Ukrainian military. So the process, and I think it's one of those dynamics, that's kind of fluid, if you will, but it is a mutual agreement. For, say, example, on the military side, where I mentioned we're one of the states strongly under consideration for it. It goes up through the office at the NGB, the National Guard Bureau level, which is commanded by a 4-star, and he makes the decision there for which state he would most like to have engage in such a military-to-military partnership, but he's not the final authority. He also, in turn, is going to gain approval by the SecDef before moving. So, but it's not just a U.S. military decision side. The decision-making is also taking place in the Swedish military. And so, it's not the type of dynamic where, hey, we're going to force a particular state on any particular country, but it's got to be a mutually agreeable decision. So towards that end, for example, when we had the Swedish defense attaché here to visit us, but we took a snapshot of their military and the force structure they had for their Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and while they've got those same components, they're aligned a little bit differently. The Marines are still part of the Navy over in Sweden. The Air Force controls all military aircraft. So whereas in our country the Marines and the Army have our own helicopters, in Sweden they all come under one command entity. So the operational dynamic of what we would have in Kentucky has to at least complement whatever their desires are. For example, I know because of engaging with the Swedish defense attaché in particular, that they are very much interested in our indirect fires. And we have a significant presence of that here in the Kentucky National Guard. They also have a very strong interest in where we have been aligned with Sweden, actually going back several years now, with the special ops folks out of the STS, the Special Tactics Squadron in our Air Wing out of Louisville. They're the Air Force's special operators, and they've engaged with their counterparts in the Swedish military for a number of years on joint exercises. So that's another complementary dynamic. Two things that I thought were particularly interesting for engaging with them, and actually we see this with some of our other partnered nations as well, but the emergency management dynamic. A lot of countries throughout the world, they may have what they call emergency management, they may have what they call civil defense, they may not have anything at all, but they're interested in the necessity of standing up such a responding capability in their government force structure that we get queried about our emergency management relationship. But another aspect also strongly deals with you and others. You could probably relate to this, the cyber defense and cyber security for what's going on these days, and not just in the military realm. Our military for the cyber world tends to be a little bit more offensively focused. But into the National Guard, we have relationships with a number of civilian entities throughout the state with more of a defensive mindset. So I don't know how well this is actually answering your question. It's a mutually agreed upon decision. Our military has to agree with whatever partnered suggestion goes forward. The Swedish military also has to agree with it, and it's a complementary dynamic based on their needs and our needs. And what I was striving to allude to, it goes beyond just the military relationships. I know with the state of Nevada, that they had recently gained a relationship with a country in the Indo-PACOM region. And one of the key things that that country wanted to build upon was the education department and how it was run for that particular state. So in that engagement, appointees and representatives of the state's Department of Education were also part of the process.
Thank you, sir. Just really briefly, earlier you had mentioned that you were going to keep politics out of one of your responses, and I certainly will too. But I think that my interest in this is predicated upon the fact that any type of foreign engagement, whether it's a NATO nation or not, becomes quickly very political. To what extent do we want to engage? To what extent do we want to provide funding? To what extent do we want to have boots on the ground? And I think that that is my interest in terms of, just having learned about individual states' engagement with some of these actors overseas. It's an interesting concept because we don't think of, California directly assisting Ukraine. And I just, when we're looking at Kentucky, it's an interesting proposition, and I look forward to learning more, and I appreciate your response, sir.
Yes, ma'am. I'm inclined to agree with you completely. It's not clearly a black and white area, but very much gray. And when does it become less of a military dynamic and more of a political dynamic?
All right. Thank y'all. Okay. Look, he's holding it real quick.
Just a short question comment. I just did a quick AI search of the web, and it said that in the U.S., the Marines are still part of the Navy. I thought you might have said that was happening in Sweden and not here, but that was a Navy thing.
Well, shoot, I would defer to any former Marines that I personally know that they might strongly object to that. And to be straightforward,
that sounds like a
I'm
political
surprised
response.
to hear that.
All right, we better hold off on that argument. That could get worse than politics here, so especially with Marines here. So, all right, Director Slinker, would you and Major Olson maybe want to? Thank you. Good choice there. And General Lamberton, if you want to hold that mic, I'm sure you will still be directed some, and that way he has his own. Make sure the green light's on. And we all know you, but please introduce yourself for the record.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Slinker. I'm the Director of Kentucky Division of Emergency Management.
Please proceed.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. And, hey, thank everyone. Good afternoon. I've been watching the clock closely because I was going to be on that verge of good morning or good afternoon, but I know we've passed that. So, good afternoon. We're here today to talk about the continuation of House Bill 157 that Representative Hart sponsored earlier in the spring in session. And as it passed, it also directed us, the new legislation directed us at Kentucky Emergency Management Department of Military Affairs to move forward with some things like planning and develop the concept of what that would look like and the budget and how much it would cost and what it would add. So, again, that's why we're here today, and we're going to get started. If you look at that first picture, that bottom, no, back up one. The bottom right picture is that's the candle factory in Mayfield. So when we're talking about why are we talking about that, that's it. So we're not speculating on events that may cause us to need this capability. We're not guessing that we may need them. We've already had them. We've had them in two incidences within the last 18, 19 months. And one was the tornadoes in Western Kentucky, December 2021, as all of you are aware. And that's one event where we had a major structural collapse where multiple urban search and rescue. And remember, urban always throws this conversation off a little bit because not a lot of Kentucky is urban. That's just kind of where it was born and where it came from. But The capabilities the teams are now all hazards teams, so they'll come in and respond to all types of hazards, including this. But here's a structural collapse where, again, 4 federal urban search and rescue teams were called in to the Western Kentucky area after the tornadoes. Those same 4 were also deployed to Kentucky during the July 2022 East Kentucky floods. Now, in this event here, the gentleman to my right, Doug Hargraves, is now our search and rescue training supervisor and has been tasked as our subject matter expert to move forward. You may remember him from the spring as a lieutenant with Lexington Fire Department. It was important enough to him to move this forward, to make a career change and come in and be the subject matter expert to help us move forward. He stood on this pile. So when we're talking about this, if you have questions, the person that stood there with the Surf P there in the National Guard, working with Doug on that, he can answer those questions. But again, between the benefits of having search and rescue teams, urban search and rescue teams in West Kentucky, and then I think the number, hundreds, maybe north of 1,000 rescues that happen in Eastern Kentucky in both land, boat, and air come into play as well. And then multiple different agencies made up those. One being at the local level. Does Kentucky currently have an urban search and rescue capability? Yes, we do. It lies within a lot of our local fire departments, the ones that have the capacity and capability of sending their fire departments out for training and getting certified in this event. That's why we found Doug and his colleagues there in this incident as well. Why would we need to have this state capability? Well, I bring up another historical disaster we've had once again in the last 18 months, but only less than 12 months ago in the high wind event that we had in early March. So 119 counties of 120 reported damages in that event. 88 of the 120 had a major disaster declared from the damages. Many of those counties, most all of those capabilities of urban search and rescue, such as Lexington, Jefferson County, many of the other ones out in West Kentucky, Northern Kentucky, Northeastern Kentucky, those are impacted counties as well in that event. That event was historical because of the number of counties that come under federal declaration. So if we had called on them for a structural collapse like this in a far West Kentucky, we would have had very limited to no resources at that local level able to respond because they were taking care of their people and their communities that they're required to. So that opened our eyes, our capabilities within this state at that local level that we use under mutual aid may not be available in one of these events. All right, why do we not just depend on the federal level? Couple reasons. Response times. At best, one, you have to wait on a federal declaration. So there's some time there. Now, those events are really big that we've mentioned, so it came very fast, less than 24 hours. They all won't be that way, but that is a contingent of those resources deploying, is that federal declaration. And then there's all kinds of factors that change this, but our estimate 12 to 24 hours for them to get on site and start working. So, and then lastly on their challenges that they have is with the frequency and intensity of disasters nationwide, developing. We've contacted many of them. They're in Hawaii, they're in Florida, they're in Louisiana. Those federal teams are constantly deployed, especially to larger populated areas. So if we called on them in an event, they may or may not be there. Those surrounding ones surrounding our state may or may not be there. So those are the reasons that we're going to be here to talk about it. And I ask that you just think about it in the way that, I come from a background of state law enforcement, so we had law enforcement problems, and local law enforcement is dealing with it. If it's depending on the size, federal law enforcement may get involved, but we've got a state law enforcement response to stuff that the state can direct, and we can build it that way. Firefighting. Locals are going to fight fires. Wildland fires come up. The locals are going to fight fires. You got the U.S. Forestry Service, but we got a state division of forestry in there that'll go fight that fire with them as well and add that capability. So here We've got locals that are trained and capable of urban search and rescue. We've got federal urban search and rescue capacity, but there is not a state-built response or that capability that we have here now. So we went to work after the legislation was passed in the spring, and we did our research. We physically visited other urban search and rescue teams. We've met with state and local partners to discuss concerns, challenges, anything that may input that makes it better. And if we've not met with them yet, they're probably on the schedule to get met with, or we're planning to meet with them. And we reached out to other states that have not a federal team, but do have a SUSAR team, a state urban search and rescue team, where the state, and we discussed things like funding, training, who's over it, who's not. Well, here, House Bill 157 positioned that under Kentucky Emergency Management, because under 39F, that's where search and rescue in the state lives and thrives, and we focus on that. So the concept we come up with, we ask you to consider, is a statewide team, a Type 1 team. Now, again, if you got much more technical than that, got a gentleman down the row here that could talk about types. I'll just say the biggest and the best, Type 1 team. And so we're saying a statewide team, because just like I mentioned the challenge earlier, where some areas of the state, the responders may not be available because they've either been affected personally or their capabilities have been affected. We can draw from the entire state to develop this team. We have individuals already qualified, but it also opens an opportunity for all of your all's areas to be a participant, to get trained and be a participant in this search and rescue team. And then that increases our capacity to not run short depending on the size of the disaster or the area of impacts. And doing that, we've picked 2 logistical locations, and once we move to the next slide, you'll see why. 2 logistical locations that happen to be, a great benefit of working under Department of Military Affairs is they have bases, they have property, they have land and buildings and all kinds of things that we were able to coordinate with and work, and where we would have some very good locations to operate out of. And mainly that is to decrease and have faster response time. The first responders are going to be the people that live there and the teams that are there, and they're going to go in. And then we got these federal teams that'll come in and stand us up and support us. But there's a lot of hours in between there, and that means there's a lot of lives in between there that we could be saving and getting out and rescuing people and making their lives safer and better. And so if we look at the Bluegrass Station there at Avon, Fayette, Clark County line, we think that's a great location for a couple reasons. One, they have the warehouse spacing to warehouse this cache of equipment that's required. And again, I was amazed about how much was needed. Semi trucks and flatbed trucks and generators. There's a lot there to be able to go in and do the things you're supposed to do. So you need a lot of space. So we have that there at Avon under Department of Military Affairs. And when you get to looking at cost, it's cents on the dollars of going out and trying to privately lease that type of footprint or that type of square footage. And then we know, all of you, know in this state, your challenges with response time is east to west. That's the length of time that's really challenging to have a statewide response and get there fast. And as you know, we have the Window H4 Training Center out west in Muhlenberg County. And there's already, the Fire Commission has training sites there. We've already met with them about how we partner in that capacity. There's lodging facilities there. So not only does it better response time, but it also allows members in that region, West Kentucky region, not to travel so far just for maybe a training class. They've got something there in West Kentucky as well. And we kind of just diagrammed this map because our goal would be to be, once deployed out of those 2 locations with our cash and our people, would be anywhere within 2 hours. And that's significantly faster than a 12 to 24. So anywhere within 2 hours when we leave out there, you'll see in those estimates there's some tips, one of Pike County in the far east and a tip, probably a Fulton County in the far west. So we're aware of those. And the next thing I'm going to talk about, we know how we can increase capacity there. But those are very minute, just a few, minutes over that estimate. But we feel like this covers 98% of the state. And can we back up one, Corianne? And the last thing a couple other components of this I want to mention is everybody witnessed the rescues, the hoist rescues in Eastern Kentucky. So, we've done that quite a bit in this state for lost hikers and things, and that will continue. And we've had that capability, but to do it at that magnitude where it took, all the resources of the Kentucky National Guard Aviation, all the hoist and aviation capabilities of the Kentucky State Police, supplemented by Tennessee National Guard Aviation and West Virginia National Guard Aviation. That's at what level we were. And there was no lack of work within about 2 days. They went as hard as they could go for hours and hours and hours. So we know it's a capability. So we've already trained and exercised with the National Guard and witnessed their training on that. We've partnered with the state police to partially fund some training for them. And the uniqueness of a HART team, as it's described here, the Helicopter Aquatic Rescue Team, so let's just keep it at HART, it's easy for me to say, is that civilian rescues may be on those state police, National Guard aircraft. So those rescuers need to be trained and they need to be well equipped. And so that would be the role. So HART wouldn't be directly under Urban Search and Rescue, but it would definitely be a component and a partnership with it, with those two agencies that do that, to make sure we can provide that capability quickly if we run into this challenge again. And the last thing I'll mention as part of what you'll see when we're talking about what this could cost is the Rescue Aid Program or Rescue Aid Fund. It's called that in two different places in the statute already. In 39, it's called either one. That is what we do already for our local search and rescue teams. They're not maybe a full-time fire department, but just a search and rescue team. They have to affiliate under 39F with Kentucky Emergency Management, and if they do, they're eligible for some grant funding that is issued out by Department of Military Affairs. That's not particularly fund it's named out there. It's just Department of Military's budget that has been given $80,000 a year for several years. And then all those teams, we're at 75 or so now that are affiliated. We've been as high as excess of 100. They apply for approved equipment, and then a advisory committee advises the Director of Emergency Management, myself, what they feel like is the priorities of how we would do that. 80,000 when you get into equipment in today's time, it just keeps them in the minimum. It doesn't enhance capabilities at all. We just try to keep them in the minimum, keep them going. And often we have to work with the rescue squads. And what I'll say, I'm so proud of them because they're the ones that go, they work nightly. Somebody gets lost, they're out trying to find them. But they also will make a decision in amongst themselves. Give it to this county this time because I can wait. But they need it worse than I do. But we have to make those decisions quite often right now on that. So that'll be part of that, and that's been our commitment to those 39F teams as well, that as this moves forward, it's not a replacement for them, it's an enhancement for them, and I think this is a good opportunity to do that. Okay, so here's the one that, I wish I, didn't have to show you, but I will show you since it's up. We sharpened our pencils on this one. And I'm not going to go into the figures, but we testified here back in the spring, and there was numbers there. But we really, really sharpened our pencils, and we traveled around and looked at what you had to have, not what you'd like to have, but what you would have to have this capability. And with those pencils, we went to work. Doug went to work. Multiple team in finance. Looking at state contracts and master agreements and what do we already have and what can we draw off of. And so this is where we came up, and those numbers that 16.2 or so total over the 2 years, that's, equipment and fleet makes up near 70% of that. So that's an initial cost. And that's just stuff you have to have, and like I said, that we can provide that list. We've got all those details, but it's stuff you have to have. And the rescue aid program, as you can see, that's an increase to that. I put that at high importance that we increase those capacities in your all's local levels, because those are going to be the first ones that wade in the water or get in the boat or come out there and get you when you need it. So that's a high importance. And then, like I said, the HART team having that helicopter rescue capability is very important as well. And so that's what, the budget would make up as we come forward going into the session next year. That's what it would look like. And then there's the sustainment cost there as well. So we've got initial cost, and then what does it cost to sustain this capability? One reason when we talk about a statewide team is 70 persons is a response of a Type 1 team, but 3 deep is the team. So they're your 210 rescuers. Now, they're not paid, so let's go put that out there first. They're not paid on a daily basis, and they're not paid. The training and things like that are either, one, their department agrees to let them do it on duty, or they're volunteering their time or coming on their own time. There would be reimbursement if there's a deployment. But when you're deployed, part of our SOPs would be our standard operating procedures. This team is the worst case scenario, so it would be deployed in either a state or federal disaster declaration or emergency declaration, because it could be an emergency. That opens up emergency funding both at the state and federal level to fund those responses. But outside of that, then those 210 aren't a daily, weekly, or monthly cost to the state as well. And so, but that 210 people is important because, like I said, a large percentage of that could be unavailable, and we'd have to call on the part of the state that wasn't impacted to come in. And, you see the capabilities. They can locate people. They can do assessments and damage and report back to the EOC about what resources are needed. They can medically stabilize the population that's affected, and they can extricate people from, collapsed structures and dangerous situations. That's because they've got rescuers, we've got canine, medical doctors, paramedics, hazardous materials, technical search, rescuers, structural engineers, and communications are all part of that team. They can operate for 24 hours. That number, being a Type 1 team, allows you to run shifts, so they can go 24 hours. And as you've seen, that's needed. And if you don't have that, we'll probably keep doing it, but people start getting fatigued, and it starts getting challenging to do it good. But this right here will give enough people to do it 24 hours. They self-sustain in 72 hours. I mean, they don't draw on strained resources already, food, water, and facilities. You'll be able to set up areas, camps that can self-sustain and not draw electric, power, or water, or any of those things away from the people that are needing it as well. And then the deployments would be up to 14 days at a time to get us in that safe and secure time frame as well as what we have. So I tried to be brief and to the point, but I'm glad to accept any questions that you may have.
Director Slinker, if you could stick around maybe a few minutes in case any members have any questions for Director Slinker. We do have just one real quick from someone who was right in the midst of all that flooding. So Representative Fugit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I couldn't say thank you enough to all of you at the table because of the response that you all made to the East Kentucky during the flooding, and especially Director Slinker. I appreciate Representative Hart and his work on this. Got just a couple questions, if you don't mind. Fish and Wildlife are already there at most. They were there that night. They have the boats, they have the personnel, they have some training, not. I wouldn't think as to the extent that you all are talking about. Will they be involved in this team? Will they be? I guess they'll be the first responders who would relay to you. I guess what the need is. What extent would they be involved?
Well, I think I'm safe to say we sure hope they are, and without having Commissioner Storm or Fish and Wildlife right here next to him, we're going to assume they are until maybe they're not. They were, as you said, played a significant role in Eastern Kentucky. They are trained in boat capabilities. They are trained in swimming, rescue swimming, and all those things because they function on the water daily. And yes, so they would be a big part of it. There's a couple things that I'll mention to give you an example of that. A lot of times, the federal teams go in as well, and they have to bring with them, they're required, they call it force protection, meaning law enforcement goes with them because sometimes people want to know, who are you and what are you doing? So we see that too is, they're very visible. The people in those community knows those officers. Those are some things that we plan on talking to them about. How could they support some of this mission? And they'll already be there. And another thing that what I experienced, and on my way out of East Kentucky once right after the flooding, I saw one of my old teams with the state police were walking around a building still searching for folks, and I stopped and talked to them. And what came together that day that we're hoping we improve on is the state police, this particular unit was there, but they didn't have any boats. So they didn't have any capabilities getting out in the water and rescuing anybody, but they were from East Kentucky, and they knew the areas, they knew the roadways, they knew the hollers, they knew where to go, but they had no way to get there. And a rescue team with a boat showed up from out of town, and they had no idea even when you give them an area, where to go. And those people formed that informal relationship right there on the side of the road and got in boats and went and rescued people. So we're hoping this, using our state partnerships, our local partnership, is to develop that on the front end where those come together, not organically, but as part of a plan.
And one follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
As far as communication, when the team comes in to, let's say, Perry County again, will the communication go through the state police post, the local 911 center, or will you have your own command post? And if so, will the local fire departments and those that have already been there working 2, 3, 4 hours still be able to communicate with this team that's coming in? Because a lot of times, well, being in the state police world, we know that communication is the most important between everybody involved. So what kind of communication would take place? Would it go through the state police? Would you have your own? How would that take place, or is that cart before the horse?
Well, I won't go that far, but to rest assured, because as you know, we know that's the biggest challenge you always have. It was in East Kentucky. Rescues were being dispatched from about 5 different locations, and so there was some duplication of people going to the same spot. So that came out in an after action review as we went through the flooding and what could have been better. How do we do it better next time? Communication is one of them. So as General Lamberton mentioned, the emergency support functions in the EOC, well, ESF2 is communications, and that's a group of state police, National Guard, local comms people, all of they work together. Federal comms people. So we've asked ESF2 to come together and help us solve this challenge. So I don't have the answer for you yet, except that it is being actively pursued of what's that one comm channel and that one reporting place that we know. And one of that is working with the National Guard as well on setting up air operations, airbase operations. And so if we set that up, we can funnel those complaints in and make sure we're not, 2 helicopters aren't flying to the same place. So we're putting things in place to better that, and I should be able to report back to you in the future more definitive answer.
That's awesome, and I know you very well, and I know it's going to be a well-oiled machine when it gets finished. So I appreciate all your work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative.
All right. We only have about 15 more minutes. General Jones, I'm sure you've been so patient for an hour and 45 minutes. We'd love to hear from you, too. And General Bullard, don't go anywhere. We're going to squeeze you in here. So,
Hey, General Bullard, I'll be brief, if anything. I'm a career infantry officer. I'm Brigadier General retired Charles Jones, Executive Director of Department of Military Affairs. One thing an infantry officer learns to be is brief, precise, and gone, okay? So that's what you're going to get here. I'll catch you up. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here and present Kentucky Youth Challenge to you. I've got to do that on several occasions, and it's a pleasure to do it again today. So you can read the slide as well as I can, but I'm going to brief you on a couple of bullets that I'd like to highlight and get on with it. Through your support during General Assembly 23, we was able to pass House Bill 244. It was signed in the statute, and now both your youth challenge programs, the one in Harlan, Kentucky, and the one at Fort Knox, Kentucky, are Kentucky Department of Education recognized public schools, and I appreciate that. That is a huge success story. Out of the 39 across the nation, Kentucky has got two of the only 17 that are public schools and meeting all educational requirements for those young men and women attending. We're currently sitting at week 15 of this class of a 22-week residential. As of today at ACA at Harlem, we got 94 cadets. You may have seen them walking around Frankfurt yesterday. They was up here for their taxpayer tour. At Bluegrass Challenge Academy, we got 64 down at Fort Knox. They're scheduled to graduate on the 17th of December, at which time they will enter the 52-week non-resident post-res program to keep them on track and ensure that they sustain those changes which was affected during the resident phase. So your question today is what is the ask I got for you this afternoon, right? So I'm gonna leave you with an ask. As that program is a DOD program, ran through the cooperative agreement, about $11.4 million a year. Of that, the state's part is about 2.8 of that. The budget for it out of the General Assembly, we receive $670,000 annually, and the rest of it is supported out of General Lamberton's restricted funds. As there's more demand and a reduction on those restricted funds in the out years in the budget ask, you will see that to sustain that program, we're going to come back and ask for additional funds during the General Assembly, which has been submitted now. Okay. We service the youth of throughout the Commonwealth, 120 counties, and that covers all Senate and House seats and districts across the Commonwealth. Because I will just about wager you, if we haven't had students out of your district there, we got them now. And what I'd like to ask each of you that take the opportunity, if you have visited and get to go down and see what we're doing for those young men and women that are coming from all walks of life across Kentucky, I will guarantee you're going to be an advocate for the program. Several of you have been here, been down there, and those guys that have been down there will attest to you. It's worth going to see the effects and the change that we have in these young men and women, providing them a second chance. I would ask that we got a graduation soon coming up on 17th December. Love to see you out in the audience. I know Representative Fugit's been there several times. We about have to lock the door to keep him from coming. But, sir, it's open, as you know. We have got young men and women out of your districts today that have either been changed by this program, could use change of this program, or currently receiving that change. And our goal is to put them back in their parent school as a productive students that's not disruptive and on course to receive their high school diploma and return and be successful Commonwealth citizens. I told you I'd be brief, and I will answer any questions you got, and then I'm going to be gone.
Senator Williams?
Do you receive SEEK funds for those students?
No, sir, we do not.
Thank you.
That was brief. All righty. General, thank you for catching us up and giving General Bullard a little bit of time there. So
you may blame me for that after he gets done.
And Representative Fugit keeps us caught up on that program, and that is a phenomenal program. We appreciate him carrying the legislation last year, and we will definitely put you in our budget request. We don't have that ability here, but we do have a little bit of a voice to get it to the right parties there. So we'll do that. Thank y'all for both being there. General Lamberton, you want to just stick around, or are you? Normally we don't capture you for the whole 2 hours, but you're welcome to. Or I'm sure he doesn't. Y'all's both areas work a lot together, and we appreciate it. So, General Bullard, it's all yours. I'm not going to tell you. You can see the time at 1:00. We do have other committees, so. Oh, hit your mic, Steve. There
I'm
you
sorry.
go.
I'm Brigadier General Steve Bullard, Executive Director, Kentucky Commission on Military Affairs, retired National Guard. I'm an aviator. I'm not an infantry officer, but we don't like to linger around long because we get shot at, and we don't like that. So I'm just going to real quick go over our legislative agenda. Eric Sherman from the Department of Defense's Defense State Liaison Office was supposed to be here, but his flight got canceled. He wasn't able to make it, so he's given you a one-page letter, which is in your packets. I also have given you in your packets a PowerPoint presentation which outlines the military community in Kentucky, and you're welcome to look at that. It's going great. Great military community in Kentucky. If you have questions afterwards, feel free to ask me. So real quick, just talk about our legislative agenda. First off, we want to reintroduce our Omnibus House Bill 63. Representative Bratcher sponsored that last year, passed unanimously in the House. Unfortunately, it did not get put on consent in the Senate for various reasons, and it did not get a vote, but we'll bring it back. And that basically is mostly cleanup. It makes a correction to the Military Interstate Children's Compact Commission. It adds the National Guard and Reserve to all of the protections of the Military Interstate Children's Compact as requested by Department of Defense. And it also adds Space Force to the definitions of the military in Kentucky. We don't have Space Force in Kentucky, but we will have Space Force retirees, and this protects their state veterans benefits. And lastly, the U.S. Army has changed the name of the 11th Theater Aviation Command at Fort Knox, which is one of our KCMA member units outlined in statute. And for that reason, we need to change the name to the Army Reserve Aviation Command. So we'd like to do all of that in one omnibus bill. Then second, Representative Fugit is sponsoring our Purple Star Schools legislation. I could talk for hours about this. And we had talked earlier about what we're doing for the military community. Purple Star Schools is a program to allow K through 12 schools to basically facilitate resources for military-connected students and families. And just provide a counselor who's trained in that area and follow our directions in doing that. We're up over 70 schools in Kentucky in 2 years, and it's a great program. Department of Defense has endorsed it. It's now in 43 states, and it started in Ohio fairly recently, and it's just an absolutely wonderful program. Heather French Henry's coming on board to support us here locally. Tomorrow, Kentucky is hosting the second annual National Purple Star Schools program. I chair the Purple Stars Advisory Board here in Kentucky, and we actually had First Lady Jill Biden reached out to us last week and asked us if she could do the introductory comments. So I said, well, sure, I'll be happy to defer that to you. So we are doing that tomorrow. This is a great, great program, and we look forward to telling you more about it. And best of all, it doesn't cost anything. That's the best part. And then lastly, Department of Defense has priority occupational licensing compacts. And that's growing rapidly. It's gone from 8 to 14 this year. And Kentucky is a leader in this area. Compacts aren't the only solution to occupational licensing, but we believe they're the best solution. And we are members of 8 of the 14 DoD priority compacts. And one that we're not, that's been existing, is EMS, and we're working with Representative Hart to get that done this year. And we believe we now have a way forward to do that. We also have Social Services Compact. Representative Ken Fleming and Representative Lisa Wilner are taking that on. We are endorsed by the Social Services Board. We have a new Massage Therapy Compact, which we're working with that board with Representative DJ Johnson. And we also have one that has just now come online, the Dental and Dental Hygienist Compact. We don't have a sponsor for it, but Representative Cook said we should go ahead and mention that in case we do get one. We are going to testify on this on the 9 November Licensing and Occupations Committee a meeting, so we're good to go for that. And we're in great shape. Pending any questions, that's all I have.
Awesome. Well, you did catch us up there. We have
in and out.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, he just wanted to make a note there. This doesn't have to do with y'all, but we appreciate y'all's presentation. General Lamberton, always great to see you, and we appreciate you being here all day with us and stuff. And hopefully you can get out there and get lunch. And we will find you a sponsor for dental hygienist. I'm thinking there's probably someone in our caucus that might have an interest in that or something like that. So thank y'all for doing that. Representative Bratcher was just mentioning, we got the administrative regs. If y'all would take a look at that, if there's any questions or anything, let us know. But I think they're pretty taking out some commas and stuff too. So pretty minor there. Corey, y'all are good with that. So, all right. And then Representative Bratcher, for those that ordered challenge coins, they're here. He brought them to the meeting because we weren't going to his office to get them, so he brought them to us. So, and I'm one of the guilty ones. So please pick those up and let's get him going. So, and they're right in the back. Our next meeting and last meeting of the interim session will be November 8th. That's 2 weeks from today. So we will see some of y'all back in here 2 weeks from today. And if there's no other business, I think we stand adjourned.